to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching from? And what are you doing right now? Maybe you're curled up in bed or resting on the couch, the lights dim, the night quiet. Wherever you are, I hope you're warm, safe, and ready to drift into a world of gentle wonder. Tonight's story is a journey through the quiet magic of Middle-earth. A tale of wisdom, friendship, and a hidden place where the deepest secrets of the world lie sleeping, waiting to be remembered. Let the soft rhythm of the words guide your thoughts. Let your breathing slow, and your eyes grow heavier with every moment. This is the Hidden Library of Gandalf, a bedtime fantasy wrapped in starlight and whispered spells, told not in haste, but in stillness. So settle in, and let the story begin.
Narrow stone paths between the ancient trees. Autumn had begun to settle into the land like a quiet spell, wrapping the valley in its cool, golden hush. Birds called softly in the early evening, their songs slow and thoughtful, like whispers shared between old friends. The sky above was painted in hues of amber and lavender, fading slowly toward the soft indigo of night. It was in this quiet peace that Gandalf the Grey sat alone beneath a tree whose roots twisted like sleeping dragons, puffing slowly on his pipe. His eyes were half-lidded, but not with sleep, rather with a thoughtfulness that weighed on him more heavily than usual. He had been in Rivendell for nearly a week, resting after his last journey into the east, where rumors stirred of strange things waking in the deep places of the world. And yet, despite the peace around him, his heart was not still. Something stirred in his dreams each night, something he could not yet name. Tonight, the stars blinked slowly into view, and as the last light slipped below the mountains, Gandalf felt a heaviness pull at his eyelids. He set down his pipe and closed his eyes beneath the tree, letting his thoughts drift like leaves on the wind. And in that drifting, the dream came once more. It began not with vision, but with sound, soft and melodic, like the rustling of ancient parchment or the low hum of forgotten voices. There were no words, only a sense of knowing, of something long lost and waiting to be found. Then came the light. Blue, not cold nor harsh, but gentle and pulsing like a heartbeat. It filled the air around him, illuminating the edges of tall, spiraling shelves filled with books bound in leather, wood, and even stone. The walls shimmered with carvings of stars and runes he did not recognize, glowing faintly with a magic he had not felt in centuries. In the center of the room stood a pedestal of black obsidian, and atop it lay a single scroll, tied in silver thread. As Gandalf reached for it in the dream, a voice, not loud, but certain, spoke his name. Olorin. He awoke with a start. The tree above him rustled, though there was no breeze. The moon had risen, casting pale light over the garden where he sat. His heart beat not in fear, but with the pulse of something old reawakening. The voice in the dream had called him not Gandalf, but Olorin, a name few remembered, a name from before the age of men. And the way it was spoken, it was no mere dream. He was certain of it now. He had been summoned. In the days that followed, Gandalf pondered the dream in silence. He did not speak of it to Elrond, though the elf lord watched him with eyes that missed little. Instead, Gandalf wandered the libraries of Rivendell by day, searching for mention of glowing blue light, of lost libraries, of magic older than the Third Age. At night, the dreams returned, always the same room, always the same voice. By the 6th day, he had found a passage in a weathered tome, bound in faded green leather. It was written in an old dialect of Quenya and spoke of a hidden sanctuary of knowledge created during the time of the two trees. A place where Mayer, long before they walked the lands of men and elves, stored fragments of divine wisdom, secrets not even the elves remembered. The passage spoke of its ceiling, deep within the bones of the world, where even time moves slower. It was called Inlet Anur, the Hollow of Starlight. Gandalf closed the book slowly. His eyes, though tired, shimmered with a spark of discovery. It was not the name of the place that struck him, but the description. The walls, the shelves, the light, it was his dream, down to the very scroll wrapped in silver thread. He knew what he had to do. As dawn broke on the 7th day, Gandalf stood at the edge of the courtyard, staff in hand, his cloak pulled about him like the wings of a resting bird. The valley was quiet, as though it too held its breath. From a nearby path, the soft shuffle of feet approached. "You're leaving, aren't you?" came Frodo's voice, quiet and unsure. The hobbit had sensed something, perhaps from the restless way Gandalf had wandered the past few days. Gandalf turned, offering a gentle smile. "Yes, my dear Frodo. There is something I must find. Something that calls me from the east." Frodo looked troubled, but he nodded. "Will you go alone?" For a moment, Gandalf hesitated. He had not intended to ask anyone to join him. This path felt meant for him alone. But there was wisdom in companionship, even on journeys of the soul. "I will not ask," Gandalf said, "but should you wish to come, I will not turn you away. This path is quiet, but not without shadows." Frodo tilted his head, then grinned softly. "Well, if you think I'll let you go alone into some ancient magical ruin, then you've clearly forgotten what kind of hobbit I am." And so it was decided. By mid-morning, Legolas had joined them as well. The elf had heard the wind change and seen a shadow pass over the moonlight days before. He believed that whatever Gandalf sought might one day affect all peoples of Middle-earth, and where such things stirred, he would walk beside them. They left Rivendell without fanfare. The path they followed was not marked on maps, but whispered of in song over the misty mountains and beyond the fading borders of forgotten realms. And as they walked, the trees behind them slowly stilled, as if the land itself knew that something long asleep was about to stir again. Each night on the journey, Gandalf's dreams grew clearer. The voice now whispered words, names of spells and places long buried in dust. He remembered not just the place, but the feeling it gave him, like standing at the threshold of memory itself. Not fear, not danger, but the solemn weight of history pressing gently against the soul. They traveled slowly, with purpose. The world did not rush them, and Gandalf did not rush the world. The wind was often still. Birds flew in quiet flocks above them. And somewhere far ahead, beneath stone and silence, the hidden library waited. Waiting for the return of one who once walked the stars. The road eastward from Rivendell began like many others in Middle-earth, quiet, narrow, and rimmed with tall trees that whispered softly when the wind passed through. But as the days wore on, the landscape shifted. The golden light of autumn dimmed beneath thickening clouds, and the laughter of distant streams grew fainter. It was not that the world turned darker, only quieter, as though it too sensed the old magic that stirred far beneath the roots of the mountains. Gandalf walked ahead, his gray cloak blending with the mist that clung to the path. His staff tapped rhythmically against the ground, a calming, steady sound amidst the deepening silence. Frodo and Legolas followed closely behind, speaking little, though their eyes often searched the horizon for signs of danger or wonder. The misty mountains loomed ahead like a sleeping beast, vast, ancient, and unmoved by time. By the third day, the air had grown colder. Mornings were damp with fog, and the sky rarely showed the sun. They moved slowly along the winding path that once served as an old dwarven trade route, now overgrown and forgotten. Moss clung to fallen stones, and vines reached like fingers across the trail. Yet none of it felt threatening. The silence, while heavy, was not hostile. It was, in its own way, sacred, like the hush within a great library before the turning of a page. Frodo, ever sensitive to the mood of the land, often glanced around as they walked. "It feels," he said once, barely above a whisper, "like we're walking into a memory." Gandalf nodded. "You are not wrong, Frodo. These paths were carved long ago, in days when the world still remembered the light of Valinor. Time moves differently here." They camped in shallow hollows or beneath overhanging stone ridges, taking turns keeping watch though no danger presented itself. On the fourth night, as they rested near a cluster of silver-barked trees, Frodo sat beside Gandalf and stared into the low-burning fire. "Do you think this place, the one in your dreams, has been waiting for you?" he asked. Gandalf puffed his pipe slowly, his eyes reflecting the soft orange glow of the flames. "In a way, yes. Or perhaps I have been waiting to be ready for it. Some knowledge does not come to those who seek it, but to those who are finally quiet enough to hear it." Frodo considered this, then nodded. "It doesn't feel like we're going somewhere dangerous. It feels like we're going somewhere important." "That's well said," Gandalf replied. "Though importance and danger often walk hand in hand, even when their steps are soft." That night, Gandalf dreamed again. He stood not in the glowing blue chamber, but upon a stone bridge suspended in nothingness. Stars shimmered beneath his feet like a sea of forgotten constellations. In the distance, a shape stirred, vague, immense, and slow. A library, yes, but alive, as though the knowledge it held breathed and remembered. The voice came again, now firmer, as if drawing nearer. "Come, Olorin. Time thins." He awoke before dawn, the sky still dark, and sat silently as the stars began to fade. By the fifth day, the path veered sharply upward, and the mountain air grew thinner. Mist coiled in the valleys like slumbering spirits, and the sound of their footsteps echoed oddly against sheer rock walls. They were no longer in familiar lands. Even Legolas, light-footed and keen-eyed, moved with quiet caution. "This is not elvish country," he murmured, brushing his fingers along the markings on a crumbling stone. "These are older signs, none that I know." Gandalf examined the runes as well. The script is ancient. Not dwarvish, nor of men. Perhaps even before the First Age. Frodo ran a hand over the rough surface. The symbols felt cold to the touch, as if the stone remembered winters from another world. As the day wore on, the mist thickened into fog, and their path grew narrow, barely more than a ledge carved into the mountainside. Far below, nothing could be seen but a pale white void. There was no wind, no birdsong, no sound at all beyond their breathing and the gentle clink of gear. They came upon a cleft in the rock wall, half hidden by vines and shadow. It was not marked by sign or stone, but Gandalf stopped abruptly before it, his staff glowing faintly at the tip. "This is the way," he said, voice quiet. Legolas peered inside. The opening led into darkness, sloping gently downward. The stone was smooth, unnaturally so, as if worn by time and footsteps long since vanished. No breeze escaped from within. It was a silence that had lasted centuries. "You're certain?" Frodo asked. Gandalf looked not at the tunnel but beyond, as though listening for something only he could hear. "I am. The dream always ended just before this place. Whatever lies ahead, it will not be remembered by maps." They entered single file, Gandalf leading the way. The tunnel was cool and dry, and the sound of their movement was swallowed by the stone. Gandalf's staff illuminated the walls, revealing carvings that shimmered faintly, spirals, stars, and interwoven lines like rivers of light etched into the rock. The tunnel wound downward, gently at first, then steeper. They traveled for hours without speaking, guided only by the glow of Gandalf's staff and the feeling, unspoken but shared, that they were moving deeper than any road had taken them before. Finally, they emerged into a small cavern, its ceiling high and smooth. Here, the mist had followed them, swirling softly near the floor like the breath of sleeping mountains. Strange flowers, pale and translucent, bloomed from cracks in the stone, their petals opening in response to Gandalf's light. They set camp here, the air too still for fire, but warm enough not to need one. Frodo lay on his bedroll with eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling where tiny glowing insects danced slowly in clusters. "Do you think anyone else has ever been here?" he asked. Gandalf considered. "Perhaps. But not for many lifetimes. And none who left stories behind." Silence followed, but it was not empty. It felt full of waiting, of memory, of something watching without menace, merely with patience. Gandalf did not sleep that night. He sat with his staff across his knees, listening. Not to sounds, but to the stillness. To the thinness in the air that had nothing to do with altitude. A place between places. A breath before speech. A silence before song. And far below, somewhere yet to be reached, the library waited. Not locked. Not guarded. But hidden behind layers of time and thought and stone. It was not a prison of knowledge. It was a resting place. A sanctuary. And soon it would awaken. The next morning, the cavern seemed unchanged, yet to Gandalf's eyes, it pulsed with an energy that had not been there before. It was as if the very stones beneath their feet had stirred in the hours they had rested. Though the air was still, something invisible felt alive, waiting just out of reach. He had been to many places in Middle-earth, places ancient and forgotten, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. Gandalf stood at the entrance of the cavern, his staff leaning on the ground as he gazed into the shifting mists that seemed to envelop the world beyond. Frodo and Legolas had already prepared their packs and made ready to move, but both noticed the same quiet unease in Gandalf's demeanor. He was looking not at the path ahead, but deep within, as though seeing something just beyond the reach of their senses. After a long pause, Gandalf spoke, his voice low and contemplative. "We are close, closer than I expected." Frodo, who had long since grown accustomed to Gandalf's moments of deep reflection, did not question him. Instead, he stood beside the wizard, looking out at the mist. "How much farther, do you think?" "There is no more path," Gandalf answered softly. From here, we must step into the silence itself. Legolas, ever alert, tilted his head, sensing something unusual about the way Gandalf spoke. The elf had lived for many long years and walked through countless places of power, yet he felt the weight of this moment pressing upon him. What does that mean, Gandalf? What awaits us beyond this place? Gandalf's gaze drifted over the swirling mists, which seemed almost to listen. What awaits is both nothing and everything. It is the place where time does not touch, where the world as we know it folds and folds again, until all that is left is what was meant to be found. Frodo glanced at Legolas, whose expression mirrored his own uncertainty. Both had felt the strange pull of the place, but neither could quite put into words what they felt. They had only just begun their journey into the mountains, and already the land seemed to shift beneath them. After a few more moments of quiet contemplation, Gandalf spoke again. We must go forward. The three companions gathered their things and, without another word, stepped toward the mist. It was not as they had expected. There was no sudden cold or oppressive weight. Instead, they were gently embraced by it, the mist swirling around their feet and curling up to their knees, as though it were guiding them deeper. It felt like walking into a dream, where the air seemed to thicken with the scent of old memories. Frodo felt his heart quicken, though he could not explain why. The world seemed strangely out of place, and yet nothing in it felt wrong. They continued onward, each step feeling slower than the last, as if the very ground beneath their feet was unwilling to let them go. The mist opened in front of them, revealing a stone archway, half hidden, barely visible, looming out of the fog like a sentinel forgotten by time. It was different from any doorway Gandalf had seen before. Though it was made of stone, its surface shimmered faintly, as if it had been carved from something softer than rock, something alive. The arch stood in the center of the mist, but it did not cast a shadow, as though it existed in its own space, outside of time. Legolas stepped forward, his hand brushing against the stone. It was warm to the touch, smoother than he expected. What is this place, Gandalf? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gandalf moved toward the archway, his gaze fixed on the faint glow emanating from its center. His staff, which had been quiet until then, now hummed softly in his hand, as though responding to the presence of the arch. This is the gate, Gandalf said. The hidden gate. It is the threshold between what was and what will be, between memory and the future. It is neither part of Middle-earth nor the Undying Lands. It exists in the space between. Frodo frowned, trying to make sense of Gandalf's words. Is it a portal? He asked. Gandalf nodded, though the answer felt incomplete. Yes, but more than that. It is a place of crossing. Only those who seek what lies beyond will find it. For a long moment, none of them moved. The archway seemed to shimmer, the mist flowing around it like a slow-moving tide. The feeling of timelessness in the air grew stronger, as though they were standing at the edge of a great ocean, its depths far beyond their understanding. What will we find there? Frodo asked, his voice small, almost uncertain. Knowledge, Gandalf replied. Not just of the past, but of the present and what is yet to come. It is a place where the secrets of the world are laid bare. But be warned, once you pass through, there is no turning back. Legolas's eyes narrowed, his mind racing as he considered Gandalf's words. You speak of things older than the elves, things lost to even the most ancient of our kin. Yes, Gandalf said quietly, For this is not merely a place of magic, but of thought, of memory, of time. It is a place that was built long before any of us were born, before even the first stirrings of the Dark Lord in the East. The secrets it holds have been buried for ages, waiting for those who are ready to discover them. The tension in the air seemed to thicken with each passing moment. The three of them stood at the edge of something vast and unknown, feeling the pull of the gate, as if the very stone were calling them to step forward. Gandalf turned to Frodo and Legolas, his expression grave but filled with resolve. We are on the threshold of something that cannot be undone. This is not a place for the faint-hearted. It is a place for those who seek truth, no matter how difficult it may be to face. Frodo took a deep breath, his heart thudding in his chest. He had come this far with Gandalf, had seen the wizard lead them through perils and wonders alike, but this felt different. This was no ordinary journey. This was something older, something profound, and perhaps something dangerous. But his trust in Gandalf was unshakable. Whatever lay beyond the gate, he knew he could not turn back now. Not when so much was at stake. Legolas, too, seemed to gather himself, his elven eyes searching the mist, his gaze filled with a mixture of wonder and caution. "Then let us pass," he said softly. "What waits beyond this gate? It calls to me as well." Gandalf smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the archway. "Very well," he said. "Then we step forward together. But remember, once you cross, you will see what has been forgotten. And not all knowledge is meant to be remembered." With that, he stepped through the archway, the mist swirling around him as he disappeared from view. Frodo followed, taking a deep breath as the cool mist closed in around him. Legolas followed last, his lithe form slipping through the gate with a quiet grace. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The mist stood still, and then, slowly, the air began to shimmer once more. The gate closed behind them, and in its place, there was only silence. For a time, there was nothing. No sound, no weight beneath their feet, no air upon their skin. Only a gentle, endless gray, as if the very space they had stepped into was unformed, waiting to become something. It was not darkness, for there was a faint silver sheen that shimmered around them, like moonlight on still water. It was not light either, not truly. It simply was. Frodo blinked, his senses drifting as though half asleep. He reached for the ground, but there was none, yet he did not fall. His feet stood on something that felt like air, solid but intangible. He glanced around, seeing Gandalf ahead, unmoved, his staff faintly glowing. Legolas stood near as well, his form more defined than the space around him, his eyes wide and alert, but calm. Then, something shifted. A breath, perhaps a subtle stirring in the gray. The silver mist began to part, drawing back like curtains unveiling a long-forgotten stage. Before them, a soft hum began to rise, slow and melodic, like the tuning of an ancient instrument. Shapes began to emerge from the haze, columns of obsidian and quartz, rising from nothing and vanishing into endless height above. Walls formed, not built but grown, etched with luminous runes that changed shape even as one looked upon them. They were inside a vast hall, circular and impossibly tall. The ceiling stretched into a dome, speckled with lights that pulsed like stars in a living night sky. Beneath their feet, the floor shimmered like crystal water, though it held their weight with ease. And all around them, lining the walls, floating between columns, and embedded in gently rotating orbs, were books. Books without bindings, some with pages that turn of their own accord. Scrolls suspended in glassy spirals. Slabs of etched stone hovering midair. And others, more peculiar still, took no form at all, but flickered like memories one could only glimpse out of the corner of their eye. It was a library. Not merely a place of storage, but something alive, aware. It did not watch them with eyes, but with presence. It did not speak, but it listened, and it welcomed them. Gandalf stepped forward, while quieting even his thoughts. His fingers ran lightly along a shelf made not of wood, but of smooth, translucent stone that sang softly when touched. The sensation beneath his hand was not physical alone, it was as if the shelf itself recognized him and responded with gentle warmth. Frodo moved slowly, taking in the room. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It is more than that," Gandalf replied, his voice hushed. "This is the Vault of Uonal, the Hidden Library. A place spoken of only in whispers among the Maya, and even then, only in dream." Legolas turned in a slow circle, watching the strange volumes orbiting far above, rising and falling like leaves in a current. "Who built this?" "No one we would know," Gandalf said. "This place predates the making of the sun and moon. It was shaped by the hands of the first thought, those who wrote the songs that created the stars. And it has been sleeping, waiting, until now." As they walked further, the library responded. Always open like petals, guiding their steps. Lights glimmered along the floor in gentle trails, marking their path, though none of them spoke aloud where they wished to go. The library knew. They passed through chambers where entire worlds seemed to be suspended in globes of memory, echoes of moments from the elder days. One room held a floating city of crystal towers, another, a battlefield locked in silent motion, swords frozen mid-strike and banners forever caught in windless air. At last, they came to a chamber quieter than the rest, smaller, but no less grand. In the center stood a table of dark stone, and upon it, an open tome that shimmered with no ink at all. The pages were luminous, written in light, the letters shifting gently as though alive. Gandalf approached, and, as he placed his hand on the table's edge, the light of the tome stilled. The words grew clear, readable, etched in the ancient language of the Aenar. Frodo peered over his shoulder, though he could not decipher what he saw. The letters themselves seemed to hum, a soft, singing language. "What does it say?" he asked. Gandalf took a long breath. "It is a history," he said, "but not a people. It is the memory of magic itself. Not spells or charms, but the essence of it, the breath of the world that makes all things move and be." Legolas stepped forward. "Is this what you were meant to find?" "No," Gandalf replied. "This is the beginning. A gate within a gate." As he spoke, the tome shuddered faintly, and the page turned. More light spilled upward, coalescing into symbols that floated above the book. They danced and shifted, forming patterns that resembled constellations. Frodo watched in silence, mesmerized. Then, without warning, the chamber trembled. Only slightly, barely a ripple through the stone, but enough that they felt it. The lights overhead dimmed for a breath, then pulsed brighter. Gandalf looked up. "It stirs," he said. "The library is awakening in truth. It senses that something lost long ago has been remembered." From behind them, the air shimmered. A voice, soft and yet ancient, spoke without sound. Olorin. Gandalf turned slowly. There, formed from light and shadow, stood a figure. Not man, not elf, but something more tall, robed in silver mist, face unseen but presence undeniable. Frodo stepped back instinctively, and even Legolas bowed his head, though the figure made no movement. "You have come," it said, "though you were not meant to remember." "I have remembered enough," Gandalf replied, his voice calm. "The time for silence has ended. What was hidden must be known again, lest we repeat the old blind march." The figure did not move, but the room darkened slightly, as though it breathed in thought. "Then learn. But know this, knowledge has a weight. You may carry it, but you may not set it down." With that, the figure vanished, and the chamber grew still again. The tome upon the table turned another page. Gandalf said nothing for a while. Then he looked to Frodo and Legolas. "We are not just visitors now," he said. "We are part of this place. And the library will not allow us to leave until we are changed." Frodo looked uncertain. "Changed how?" "In ways we cannot yet understand," Gandalf replied. "But for now, we rest. The library will speak again when it is ready." They found a resting place in a small alcove nearby, soft seats shaped of gentle light and shadow, cradling them without weight. It was a peace like no other, as if the very air was wrapped in quiet song. And though mystery still loomed, the tension ebbed, replaced by wonder and a quiet readiness. The library had awakened. And with it, the world had begun to remember. Gandalf awoke to a hush so complete, it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. He sat in a chamber unlike the last, though he had no memory of walking to it. The walls were smooth and luminous, arcing high above in graceful curves, glowing with a soft, golden light that warmed the air without revealing a source. The floor beneath him pulsed faintly, like the slow rhythm of a sleeping heart. It was quiet, but not empty. The library was awake now, and it was listening. Frodo stirred nearby, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. He blinked at the unfamiliar room and sat up, pulling his cloak closer around him. "Did we move? Or were we moved?" Gandalf murmured, scanning the room with a thoughtful frown. He sensed no danger, only the strong presence of something old, patient, and watchful. Legolas was already standing, alert as ever. His elven senses caught a subtle vibration in the air, more felt than heard, like distant voices humming through stone. "There is a presence here," he said softly, "older than even the library's walls." Gandalf rose to his feet, leaning on his staff. "It is a guide," he said, "or perhaps a test. The library is not simply a place of knowledge. It reveals only to those who are ready to understand." As he spoke, a portion of the wall before them rippled like water, then slid aside without a sound. A corridor opened, lined with small, floating spheres of light. They hovered in midair, bobbing gently as if in anticipation. The path beyond them curved downward into a soft amber glow. "We follow," Gandalf said. The trio stepped into the passage. The moment their feet crossed the threshold, the wall behind them sealed itself once more, smooth and unbroken, leaving no trace of the door. Yet there was no fear, no sense of entrapment. The library, in its strange way, felt almost protective. As they walked, the silence deepened, not empty, but expectant. It was the kind of quiet one found in ancient cathedrals or sacred groves, where the soul grew still, and thoughts began to echo louder than footsteps. At the end of the corridor, the passage opened into a vast circular chamber. But this one was unlike the others. There were no shelves, no tomes or artifacts. Only a pedestal at its center, upon which hovered a single flame. It was small, no larger than a lantern's flicker, yet it lit the entire space with a golden red glow that danced along the walls like firelight. But there was no heat. The flame did not burn. It simply was, and as they stepped into its presence, each of them felt it in a different way. To Gandalf, it was memory of things long buried, of light before the world, when he had first awoken in the gardens of Ermo in the west. He could hear the song of the Aenir echoing in the corners of his mind. To Legolas, it was music, notes on the wind, the song of stars at dawn, and the long sigh of trees that remembered the world before the darkness crept in. And to Frodo, it was a heartbeat, steady, gentle, comforting. It reminded him of the Shire, of spring mornings and piped smoke and the feeling of being safe beneath a warm roof while rain tapped on the windows. Gandalf approached the flame. The first flame, he whispered. The origin of all light, before even Aenir and Ithil, the sun and the moon, were kindled. Before time had rhythm. Frodo stared at the fire, awed. But how is it here? I thought that was legend. Legends often hide truths too bright to stare at directly, Gandalf said. This is not the flame imperishable that dwells with Iluvatar, no. But it is a fragment of that first light, preserved, perhaps, by the ones who built this place. A memory, yes, but a living one. As he spoke, the flame stirred. It bent slightly toward him, flickering higher. From it, a voice emerged, not in words, but in thoughts that shaped themselves into meaning. Child of the West, you have come far. Gandalf did not answer with speech. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the presence that now surrounded them all. You seek what was lost, the voice continued. But not all that is lost should be found. I seek what must be known, Gandalf replied calmly. For if it lies in shadow, it may one day be used against the light. The flame pulsed. You speak wisely. Yet wisdom carries burden. What you learn here cannot be unlearned, nor will the world remain unchanged by it. Frodo stepped forward, hesitant. Will it help us? What we find, will it make us stronger? There was a long pause before the flame answered. It will make you see. The flame suddenly expanded, just slightly, and the chamber responded. Images began to appear in the air around them, not as pictures or illusions, but as echoes, like dreams walking through mist. They saw tall towers falling, oceans surging where there had once been forests. They saw a blade of light piercing through a dark star. They saw a city in the clouds, drifting over a land torn by shadow. And they saw a figure, hooded and indistinct, standing before a gate of obsidian, holding aloft a key shaped like a branch of flame. Then the images faded, and only the flame remained. Gandalf exhaled, deeply. Visions, he murmured, but of what? The past, or what may come? The voice of the flame answered gently. Both. Time is not a river, but a song. Its verses repeat, change, harmonize, or clash. You see the chorus, but not the end. Legolas frowned, stepping closer. Then what are we meant to do with what we've seen? Remember, said the flame. and choose. The flame dimmed slightly, and from the pedestal, a small object appeared, shaped like a crystal drop of flame, no larger than a pebble. It floated down toward Gandalf, who caught it in his palm. It was warm, not hot, but pulsed with a soft inner light. "This is your key," the voice said. "Not to unlock, but to see. It will reveal the veiled, if you dare look." Gandalf closed his fingers around it. "I will." The chamber slowly began to dim. The flame lessened to a soft flicker. And then, as if satisfied, it whispered, "Then go, keeper of flame. The deeper truths lie still ahead." The pedestal sank back into the floor. A doorway, unseen until now, opened behind them, leading further into the library's heart. As they turned to go, Frodo looked back one last time at the tiny flame. It barely glowed now, but it remained a quiet reminder of what had once lit the very birth of the world. He reached out and lightly touched Gandalf's cloak. "Do you think we'll understand it? Everything?" Gandalf smiled faintly, his eyes distant but peaceful. "In time, Frodo. Not all at once. The library does not rush. And neither should we." And with that, they stepped through the new threshold, the air growing deeper, darker, and quieter with each step. The journey had begun to reveal not just hidden knowledge, but the weight of understanding. And somewhere in the deep, the library waited still. The corridor they now walked was unlike any they had yet seen in the Hidden Library. The walls were no longer made of smooth stone or veined crystal, but of shifting threads, delicate, shimmering strands that wove in and out of one another, forming endless tapestries of light and shadow. They stretched across the walls and ceiling, moving gently as if stirred by a wind that could not be felt. The passage ahead seemed to ripple as they walked, the threads parting slightly before them and closing silently behind. It was as though they walked through the fabric of memory itself. Frodo stayed close behind Gandalf, feeling the weight of the silence more heavily here. Though it was not oppressive, it pressed gently against his thoughts, encouraging quiet introspection. Each step brought with it a subtle shift of the air, a sigh of the past brushing against his skin. He glanced at one of the tapestries to his left. Within the weaving strands, scenes unfolded, not with clarity, but like half-remembered dreams. He saw elves dancing beneath starlit skies, towers rising from green hills, and ships drifting across mirror-smooth oceans. The images dissolved as he passed, replaced by others, glimpses of forgotten moments long faded from the world. "What is this place?" he asked softly. Gandalf did not stop walking. "These are the echoing halls," he said. "A repository of echoes, of the silent voices of the world. Not words, but feelings. Memories of light, of sorrow, of hope, woven into the very walls." Legolas moved with careful grace, his gaze fixed ahead. "It feels like walking through a song that no one sings anymore," he murmured. "Exactly so," Gandalf nodded. As they continued, the corridor widened. The tapestries thinned and eventually gave way to vast open halls, their ceilings disappearing into soft twilight above. The air was cooler here, and the silence deepened, taking on a hollow resonance, as though the space itself remembered every voice that had once passed through it. Statues lined the halls, tall figures with blank faces, carved in poses of reflection, arms outstretched as if offering invisible gifts. Some were crumbling, their edges softened by time, others stood untouched, glowing faintly with inner light. Between the statues lay pools of still water, mirror flat and perfectly round. Gandalf paused by one and knelt, peering into its depths. The water did not reflect their faces. Instead, it revealed visions. Frodo leaned in beside him, and his breath caught. Within the pool, a scene unfolded, soft and blurred, like a memory not quite remembered. A young child with curly hair sat by a fireplace, a book open in his lap. The fire flickered gently, casting golden light across a small hobbit hole. Frodo watched, realizing it was himself, younger, smaller, and blissfully unaware of what lay ahead. He turned away, heart aching with a strange blend of nostalgia and sorrow. Gandalf spoke gently. The echoing pools show us not what was, nor what is, but what we carry within us. Pieces of our spirit, drawn forth in the presence of the library's remembering. Legolas gazed into another pool, but said nothing. Whatever he saw, it was for his eyes alone. They moved on. Further in, the air grew warmer, touched by a subtle energy, like the space between thunder and its echo. The hall narrowed once more, leading to a chamber carved entirely of black stone. Not the cold black of obsidian, but a deeper hue, like starlight swallowed by the void. At the center of the chamber stood an obelisk. Its surface was smooth, unbroken, but it shimmered with faint lines that moved like veins beneath skin. Gandalf approached it slowly, his hand tightening around the crystal flame given to him by the first flame. The crystal flickered. A pulse passed through the chamber. The obelisk responded, glowing faintly. Then a soft vibration filled the room, a resonance as though a string had been plucked somewhere in the bones of the world. And from the shadows of the hall emerged a voice, not as thunderous as the flames had been, but more piercing. Like wind speaking through the cracks of ancient doors. "Bearer of the flame," it said, "you stand before the lock." Gandalf nodded. "I am ready." Fewer still survive the unlocking. The obelisk brightened. Lines of glowing script began to appear, curling around its surface in a slow spiral. "What do you seek within these walls?" Gandalf stepped forward. "Truth. Not for power, but for preservation. Knowledge not to wield, but to guard. There is a darkness rising again in the world, not in the form of a dark lord, but in silence, in forgetting. The library may hold what we need to meet that danger." The voice paused. "And would you bear the cost?" "I already do." The crystal in Gandalf's hand shone brighter, casting warm light across the room. The obelisk responded in kind. Its surface cracked, not with destruction, but like the breaking of a shell. From within, a soft golden mist rose, curling into the air. "Then look," the voice whispered. "But see with care." Gandalf reached forward and touched the mist. At once, his mind expanded, not in violent rushes, but in gentle unfolding. Like petals opening one by one to sunlight. He saw things, images, thoughts, fragments of the library's deepest memories. He saw the shaping of the world before the world. He heard the songs of the Aenir as they danced in the void. He saw Sauron, not the tyrant of Mordor, but the servant of all, gentle-handed and curious. He saw the first time the elves named the stars. He saw the day the Valar wept for the fate of men. And then he saw something more recent. A figure in shadow, cloaked and formless, standing among ruins where books burned and knowledge fell into ash. A whisper on the wind, repeating again and again. What is forgotten may be twisted. What is remembered must be guarded. The vision faded. Gandalf stepped back, breathing heavily. The mist withdrew. The obelisk darkened once more. Frodo steadied him. Are you all right? Yes, Gandalf said, his voice low, though I will not soon forget what I've seen. The library has shown me a warning. Legolas looked toward the darkened obelisk. Of what? Of an enemy not yet revealed, Gandalf replied. One who moves in silence, not with armies or rings of power, but with forgetfulness, with the erasure of wisdom. The world may not notice until it is too late. The chamber was still again. But somewhere far off in the library, a faint bell chimed, a gentle note, like the first drop of rain on quiet stone. We are being called, Gandalf said. They turned from the chamber and followed the sound, deeper into the heart of the library, where the final secrets waited still, cloaked in silence and song. The bell's chime echoed gently through the library's unseen corridors, low and melodic, guiding the companions onward with a rhythm older than language. It was not a call of urgency, but one of remembrance, a tone that stirred something within them, like a melody long forgotten yet somehow familiar. As they walked, the architecture around them began to shift again. The walls no longer shimmered with memory or wove themselves into tapestry. Instead, they became rougher, more grounded, carved with simple, clean lines of stone. The hallway narrowed and widened in a gentle breathing motion, as though the library itself lived, not as flesh and blood, but as story and thought. Frodo looked around, his eyes catching the inscriptions along the walls, hundreds of names etched in countless languages. Some he recognized, Elvish script, Dwarvish runes, even a few in the curving letters of Westruun. Others were entirely foreign. There were names longer than sentences, some that appeared only as symbols that shimmered and shifted, never the same twice when he looked. What are these? He asked, his voice hushed. Gandalf's gaze lingered on the walls. They are names, he said softly. The true names of those who shaped the world, not kings or warriors, but those who remembered. Scribes, singers, keepers of flame and scroll. This is the Hall of Names. Legolas ran a hand gently over one of the walls, feeling the age in the stone. It feels sacred, he murmured. It is, Gandalf replied. Here dwell the memories of those who bore knowledge when others sought only power. Those who walked in silence and whose words shaped the world in whispers. They continued on. Eventually, the corridor gave way to a tall antechamber. At its center stood a great archway, ornately carved but unfinished, its upper keystone missing, leaving the arch incomplete. In the space where it should be, a single thread of light hovered in place, pulsing softly like a suspended note waiting to resolve. Beneath the arch stood a solitary figure. It was robed in dark gray, its hood drawn deep over its face. Its hands were clasped before it, long fingers resting lightly atop a staff made not of wood, but of braided silver and ash. The figure did not speak as they approached. It simply watched, silent and still. Gandalf slowed. The keeper, he whispered. The figure inclined its head. When it spoke, its voice was not old nor young, it was calm, clear, and utterly without ego. It was the kind of voice one might imagine belonging to a mountain or a river, enduring, always there. You have walked far, great pilgrim. Gandalf bowed his head with respect. and yet still I walk." The keeper nodded. "Then you understand. The path of the seeker is not to find, but to continue. To learn, to carry, and to pass on. As you do now." Frodo stepped forward, curiosity bright in his eyes. "What is this place?" The keeper turned toward him. "This is the threshold. Beyond lies the index, where the deepest names are written and truths too delicate for the surface world reside. It is not a place to visit lightly." Legolas narrowed his gaze. "And what lies within? What truth do you guard?" The keeper was quiet for a time before answering. "A memory of the world before the sundering, before the division of tongues and paths, before knowledge fractured into lore and truth into belief. A name known by all, now forgotten by all." Gandalf's eyes brightened. "The first name." The keeper slowly extended one hand, pointing to the suspended thread of light above the arch. It trembled faintly. "To pass, you must give something of yourself. A name freely offered. Not one given to you, but one you have earned." Frodo looked puzzled. "A name I've earned?" Gandalf turned to him. "It means you must give a part of your journey. A piece of your story that belongs only to you. What the library keeps are not names for power, but names that hold meaning. Memory made into word." There was silence then, deep and still, as though the library waited to breathe. Frodo stepped forward, heart quietly pounding in his chest. He thought of all he had carried, not just in this journey, but before. The burden of the ring, the long days and darker nights, the scars left behind. The small joys, too, the hope in Sam's songs, the laughter of Pippin, the quiet comfort of Bilbo's study. He closed his eyes. Then he whispered, "Endure." The light above the arch flared softly. The keeper turned to Legolas. The elf prince stepped forward without hesitation. "Watcher," he said, "I have witnessed too much, and yet I continue to see." The light brightened further. And then the keeper turned to Gandalf. The old wizard met the shadowed gaze without flinching. "Bearer," he said, "not just of flame or staff, but of stories, of sorrow, of choice." The light flared once, then resolved into a keystone, a smooth, shining stone that drifted into place above the arch, completing it. The moment it settled, the archway shimmered with a sound like wind chimes in moonlight. The air beyond it shifted, and through the gateway, they saw a vast room filled with spirals of starlight, floating tomes with no bindings, and glowing constellations of script that hung in the air like drifting galaxies. This was not a hall of books, nor scrolls, nor flame. It was thought itself, recorded without ink or parchment. Living memory. The keeper stepped aside. "You may enter. But be warned, what you find will not stay behind when you leave. It will go with you, and change you." Gandalf nodded. "That is the purpose of all true knowledge." As they passed under the arch, Frodo glanced back one last time at the keeper, who gave a small nod of approval or farewell, he could not tell. Then they stepped into the index. The room was vast beyond understanding. There were no floors or ceilings, only space filled with stars of meaning. Threads of memory drifted past them, songs sung by the sea, names spoken before the sun rose, questions asked by those long turned to dust. the companions walked slowly, reverently. And far ahead, at the very center of this chamber of thought, hung a single sphere of light, wrapped in symbols that no tongue could speak aloud. Gandalf knew. The first name waited. And with it, the final truth the library had kept safe for so long. The air within the index was unlike anything Frodo had ever breathed. It was not wind, nor breeze, nor scent. It was the memory of breath, the gentle echo of inhalation that once belonged to the world when it was young. It filled his lungs with a kind of stillness that was not silence, but a quiet awareness, as if the chamber listened as deeply as it watched. The light ahead, the sphere wrapped in drifting symbols, pulled at them softly, like a moon calling the tide. There was no urgency, no pressure, only the warm tug of purpose, like a thread woven through their paths long before they knew they had one. As they stepped closer, the floating symbols shimmered and rearranged themselves. Frodo watched them change, not into words exactly, but into ideas. He saw images of creation, of stars spun from dust and laughter, of tears that birthed rivers, of shadows that held light instead of stealing it. He understood, somehow, that this was not language meant for speaking, it was for feeling. Gandalf moved with measured steps. His staff, once a light against the dark, now glowed softly in resonance with the room. The crystal given by the first flame pulsed in harmony with the symbols in the air. The closer he came to the sphere, the clearer it became that this was what had called to him, not just in this journey, but through all his wanderings in Middle-earth. Not a voice, but a longing. Not a command, but an invitation. The sphere hovered just above a plinth formed from a single, seamless piece of starlit stone. Around its base flowed gentle streams of light, like rivers of memory, pooling in silence beneath it. Frodo stood beside Gandalf, Legolas a quiet presence on the other side. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. They felt it. This was the center of the library, not a center of space, but of meaning. The place from which all knowledge, all magic, all stories had once flowed. Gandalf stepped forward. Slowly, he reached out and placed his hand near the surface of the sphere. He did not touch it. He only opened himself to it. The sphere responded. With a sound like the hush of wind in high trees, the sphere unfolded, not shattering or splitting, but unwrapping itself in spirals of soft light, like petals revealing the heart of a flower. Within, there was no object, only light. And within the light, a sound. A name. It was not spoken aloud. It did not belong to any tongue of elves, men, or even the Vala. It existed as pure meaning. Gandalf heard it not with his ears, but with his spirit. And in hearing it, he knew what it was. The first name. The name that had been spoken before time, not by any voice, but by existence itself. The name of being. The word that meant all and nothing, self and other, beginning and end. Tears gathered in Gandalf's eyes. Not from sorrow, but from the vast, encompassing understanding that washed over him. This was the root of all magic, all lore, not in power, but in connection. This name did not control. It unified. It reminded the world that it was whole, that its divisions were temporary, its silences passing. He whispered it, not aloud, but in his heart. And in that moment, the library responded. Light spilled outward, not in brightness, but in clarity. The symbols drifted faster, now dancing, weaving stories between them. The memories stored in crystal and pool, in tapestry and flame, sang together in harmony. Every forgotten truth stirred. Every buried name trembled toward remembrance. The library was awakening. Frodo gasped softly as a warmth moved through him. He saw himself at Bag End in Rivendell on Mount Doom. But more than that, he saw his thread in the great tapestry of Arda. Not heroic or grand, but essential. Like a single note in a song that could not be sung without it. Legolas, too, stood still with wonder. He saw the forests before they were wounded, the starlight before the sun. He saw his people's silent vigil and knew it was not in vain. Their watching mattered. Their patience sang. Gandalf turned to them, his face soft with something beyond wisdom. Peace. We carry it now, he said. The first name. Not as a weapon or a treasure, but as a light in the soul. Each of us. It cannot be written or spoken aloud. It can only be lived. Behind them, the entrance to the index remained open. But they knew this was the end of their path within the library. They had found what lay hidden. And now, the only task remaining was to remember. They left the index without hurry, the sphere slowly folding closed behind them. The symbols drifted once more into stillness. But something had changed. As they passed through the arch of names, the keeper stood waiting. You carry it now, the figure said, not as a question, but a truth. We do, Gandalf replied. The keeper bowed slightly. Then the library is no longer hidden. It is within, where it always belonged. Outside the chamber, the library seemed lighter, as though it, too, breathed easier. The paths they retraced shimmered with recognition, greeting them not as strangers, but as honored guests. Even the shadows held a gentle warmth now, like a night that knows morning is coming. When they reached the spiral chamber once more, the first flame flickered in greeting. You have found the name. Gandalf nodded. We have. And we will not forget it. Then the world is not lost. With that, the flame offered a final breath, a small ember of golden fire that drifted to each of them in turn. It touched Frodo's hand, Legolas's brow, and Gandalf's heart. The warmth lingered, not hot, but present, like a memory that would never fade. As they stepped back into the world beyond the library, the doorway closed behind them, not with finality, but with understanding. The hidden library was hidden no longer, because its truth now lived in the ones who had walked its halls. The forest greeted them with birdsong and breeze. The sky above was soft with twilight. They said little as they walked, each holding the quiet within them. Later, by the fire beneath the stars, Frodo looked to Gandalf. Will anyone else ever find it? He asked. Gandalf smiled gently. Not by maps, not by spells, but perhaps in their hearts, in the stories they choose to carry, in the names they give themselves and others, in kindness and in memory. Frodo nodded, sleep beginning to take him. Gandalf watched as his eyes closed, the soft rhythm of breath returning to the world around them. And in the hush that followed, he whispered the first name once more, only in his mind. And somewhere far away, the library stirred in its dreams. Still watching, still remembering, still waiting for those who would seek, not to conquer, but to understand. Thank you for joining me tonight on this gentle journey through Middle-earth. Through shadowed halls and glowing lights, forgotten names and quiet truths. We walked alongside Gandalf, Frodo, and Legolas. Not to seek power, but to remember what was lost. And perhaps, what still lives within us. If your eyes are heavy now, if your breath has slowed, then the story has done its work. Let the echoes of the library wrap around you like a blanket of starlight. Let your dreams wander gently, without worry, without rush. The world will wait. For now, you can rest. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you'll always have a soft place to return to. Every night, when the world grows quiet again. Sleep well, traveler. Until our next story. Good night.